Chapter 8 Surrender. Surrendering is not about handing some issue to the divine and being left behind. It is about leaving some issue behind and handing yourself to the divine. The Cosmic Game.
The power of surrendering to the divine is found in every religion. It is a universally accepted teaching. Many say that they are going to hand their personal struggle to God. Do we really know how to do this? I did not, until I had a most humbling experience about surrender. I have mentioned Guruji previously. A brief background is needed to set the stage. He is a very private person, and I need to respect that. When we met, he was living in the poor outskirts of a major Indian city. Anyone who visited him was aware of his simple and humble lifestyle. He lived in a very small apartment with his family. By Western standards, he was living in poverty. His entire apartment contained enough for activities of daily living. Guruji worked as a teacher's assistant in a privately run high school. Wealthy people send their children there. The teachers, as in many areas of India, are paid below their value. He would take the bus every day to work and back. The crowded buses are a unique Indian experience. He spent the majority of his day in travel and work. One year, he suggested that I visited him in early January. That month is usually a difficult time for me to travel. However, I booked a flight to spend 5 days with him. My mind became active as usual. I concluded that if he wanted me to come, there was a special reason for this. I was preparing myself that he would have some new technique for me to practice. I arrived, and the first day he had to be away. We met on the second day. It was pleasant, but I received no new teachings. In casual conversation, he mentioned that his school was having a past students' reunion. Very prominent people in the Indian government, as well as Bollywood actors, were going to attend. He received an invitation with a strong message that all teachers were expected to attend. Jacket and tie were compulsory. There was no way that he had owned a jacket or tie. He always wore the traditional Indian attire. My first thought was to offer to buy him the needed clothes. That was my head talking. My heart was saying, no, be patient and observe. I had a strong feeling that if he did not show up to the ceremony, he could well be fired. Guruji was not a political person. He would defend his truth. This was not always well received by others, particularly administrators. I told him how I felt. His reply was filled with truth. He said that he served God. If he was to be fired, then that is what God would want. As the day got closer to this event, I was feeling more anxious for him. My anxiety and caring for him was overriding my curiosity and surrender. There was a parallel situation that was taking place. About 3 months before I arrived, a foreigner named Joe had come to India. He had made trips previously to see Guruji. His hope was that he would be taught the techniques for meditation. On each visit, Guruji told him that permission from divine guidance was not given. Joe decided that he was going to stay in India until he could receive the teachings. Of all the luck, he could rent an apartment on the floor below Guruji. When I arrived, I met Joe. His story was that his belongings were held in customs. From all appearances, Joe was not prepared to pay the usual bribe. I immediately recognized that this was Joe's test. He could easily pay the bribe. He was being stonewalled by customs. His test was to see if he would honor his truth. I am sure that many times his mind would tell him how easy it was to pay the bribe and obtain his belongings. It was already 3 months spent going back and forth to the city's custom office. Guruji and I would meet after work. Joe would join us shortly afterwards and update us about another futile day at customs. I would usually arrange for my hotel car service to drop me off at his place and then return to pick me up at a specific time. On the day of this fated reunion, I arranged for the car to be available for the entire evening. I was hoping that if things worked out, he would have transportation for the event. The time was getting closer to that critical moment when he would have to leave in order to arrive on time. He appeared unperturbed. He kept chatting, but I was getting more restless. I kept reminding him that he needed to decide about attending. He kept saying that it was entirely in God's hands. If God wanted him to attend, God would show him the way. There was a total surrender. Suddenly, Joe showed up for his usual visit. He was beaming. An unusual occurrence took place. His belongings were released to him. He wanted us to come down to his apartment and watch him unwrap all his religious ornaments and statues. We were doing this, but I was mindful of the time. I finally said to Guruji that he had to make up his mind. The hotel taxi was waiting in a busy area, and either we would have to head to the event or I would need to send the car back to the hotel. Joe was curious about what we were referring to. I explained the situation to him. He thought for a moment and said that he might have a jacket and tie in his unpacked luggage. He located them after a quick search. The jacket fitted Guruji perfectly. Joe is noticeably smaller than him. We even had to knot the tie on him. He returned upstairs to tell his family that he was heading out to the event. It was fascinating to see the look of surprise and then the big grin on his wife's face. Joe and I had to take a photo of them together. Guruji attended the reunion at the last moment in a Giorgio Armani outfit. He stayed in his place of surrender and let the divine show the way. "You see, Badriji," he said, "you do not need a closet full of clothes waiting for an occasion to happen. God will give you what you need if it is needed. After that, it will return to a place where it can be of use to someone else. If you serve God faithfully and fully surrender, God will always look after you." That was what I had come to India to experience. It was about true surrender. The greatness of a man's power is the measure of his surrender. William Booth. Intellectually, the issue of fully surrendering to the divine is easy to understand. Emotionally, I struggled. I knew that there was no better way to handle my distress than the divine. Why was I not handing it over? My mind went through countless scenarios. Did I have a lack of faith or trust? Obviously, I did. How could I address my internal dilemma? My intellect could not address it. I wanted to access a way to learn how to surrender. I tried my usual routines. I ran through the 3 reflections. I did a forgiveness process. I used my breathing techniques to slow down my thoughts. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A few years previously, I came home from work. I was talking to my son when something on the television caught my attention. It was the Oprah Winfrey Show. I had caught it almost as it was ending. My quick impression of what was taking place was that Oprah was going to grant a scholarship to a young person. This person was in a social situation where further education would require needed support. The cameras were focused on the teenagers in the classroom. Everyone was waiting to see who would be declared the recipient. I mentioned before about the perception of a child recognizing his loved ones at birth. The same process happened for me. A young lady suddenly became consciously highlighted from all the faces around. At the same time, her name was announced. Instantly, I had an epiphany. In a flash, I experienced the path where her life was heading previously. I could see possibilities playing out as to her future on that path. Spontaneously, I was also seeing the new direction that this sudden shift had created for her. It changed the whole programming. I can describe it as a train which was heading in a certain direction. The scenery and stops would follow it in a predictable way. Someone switched the railroad tracks, and the train was suddenly heading in a new direction. It was a wonderful example of the intervention of free will. I experienced the new possibilities for her future. Like the woman with the flat tire, the impact affected all the people around her as well. There were still struggles that she would face, but they would be of a different quality. In fact, it would be easier to achieve more positive results. Like the coil spring, which narrows as it rises, this young lady would no longer be stuck at the base. She was moving up the coil, and her obstacles, hopefully, would be of shorter duration and less intensity. A random act of kindness changed so much in the future for many. When this memory surfaced, I still could not connect the dots to understand what this meant in relation to surrender. The third reflection was telling me that something was hidden in plain sight that I was not seeing. I decided to be patient. For this particular situation, I could surrender the outcome. I recalled the common experience that if I let it go at the right time, I would understand. A few days later, I received an inner message. It said, "The divine does not rescue us. The divine provides us with diversions when we are stuck." Oprah did not rescue this young lady from her life. Our minds were telling us this. Oprah had created a diversion where this fortunate person could go in a different direction. For the next few weeks, I allowed this information to assimilate within me. I learned the difference between distractions versus rescue. If we have free will and we need to succeed in the game, why should we be rescued? It takes away our opportunity to succeed. A man was going through his second divorce. He had been questioning why this had occurred again. He worked hard to overcome the pain of the first situation. It repeated itself in his second marriage. Now he was working through his anguish again. He did not recognize his agendas. He was at the bottom of the coil just circling around. His first reflection would have told him that he was not managing things better. A few months later, he called a friend. He sounded more energized. He told his friend this story. He had been driving home from a long trip. He was almost at his house when he decided to stop and have an ice cream cone. It was a hot day. He sat outside the ice cream store on a bench enjoying the sunshine. A woman sat beside him, also enjoying her ice cream. They started a casual conversation. He was telling his friend how they spent a few hours sitting with each other. He spoke about how much they laughed together. He had not had so much fun in a long while. He described how they seemed to be compatible. It was almost as if they knew what each other was going to say next. He was excited that she had agreed to go out with him the following week. At some level, this man was hoping that this new relationship was the one that would make things better for him. In other words, it was going to rescue him from his pain and suffering. He was not coming to terms with his agenda. The story goes on from there. After a few dates with this woman, he contacted his friend again. He sounded down in spirits. He reported that he was in a quandary. This relationship was not turning out as he expected. Again, he was questioning why he was not lucky in love. Our mind has been prepared that whatever we do, there is an expected outcome. Sometimes it is conscious, other times it is not. I have told myself so many times that I would attempt to deal with an issue. I convinced myself that if the situation did not resolve, then at least I had tried to address it. I used all the cliches such as nothing ventured, nothing gained. I was disappointed when it did not resolve. Frequently, people will give money to charity. They will say that they have distanced themselves from the outcomes. The money could be used for any purpose. However, these same people become upset if they feel that the money is being spent differently from what they expected. They always expected outcomes. The divine does not create rescues. It is us who try to do so. The divine creates diversions. So should we. A diversion takes us away from where we are stuck. This is the only expectation that we put on it. We will always succeed because anything that we do will shift us from being stuck. I recognize that diversions do not have expected rescues or outcomes. We actually surrender the outcome. Guruji did not expect to be rescued from his situation. A series of diversions occurred. I arranged a car. I did not know whether he would go or not. I was open to the outcome. Joe did not know that he would receive his belongings that day. A series of diversions took place. Here is how the group practiced this technique. Whenever there was an issue that was distressing, we would consciously tell ourselves that we would create a diversion. A mother was waiting for her daughter to return from a date. It was already late. Previously, her mind would be caught up in different scenarios. By the time it took her daughter to arrive, she would have gone through fear of an accident. She would have been angry that her daughter had not honored her promise to return on time. I am sure that you have your own examples of how you manage during a distressed situation. The group would then each create a conscious diversion of their own choosing. Begin with the truth. Make it as simple as possible. Whenever I am stuck emotionally with an issue, I may do the following. I identify what I am worried about. I then tell myself that I am going to create a conscious diversion. I am going to brush my teeth or call someone I have been thinking about. Make it simple. My linear thinking mind will argue that this makes no sense. I recognize that my mind is looking for a meaningful outcome for my actions. So many of our actions are governed by the need for outcomes. There may be a resistance to doing this. I train my mind to accept that I am in charge and that I will work towards surrendering of outcomes. I experienced the situation while traveling. I needed to connect with another flight. I had to go through customs and then catch my next flight out. We were already running late. I was worried about missing it. Everything was becoming a crisis. I started with my truth. I was anxious. I then told myself that I would create a diversion. I would ask the flight attendant for a cup of tea. Whenever my mind went back to my worry, I would recognize it and consciously create another diversion. I would read a magazine or take a short walk to stretch my legs. Gradually, I found that I was more at peace with the outcome. It was out of my hands. I actually missed that flight and connected with one a few hours later. I spent that time developing one of the concepts for this book. If you receive excellent news about something, tell yourself that you received a wonderful diversion. Sometimes with duality, good news today can turn out differently tomorrow. The man in the ice cream store is a good example of that. He needed to tell himself that going out on a date was a diversion. Whatever the outcome, he would create another one. He would surrender the results. The woman was not there to rescue him from his agenda. The group practiced this diligently. We all found that our expectations shifted. Anxiety lessened. We became so aware of how deep our expectations of outcomes or rescues were. Creating conscious diversions brought up this pre-conscious process. We began to experience the true feeling of surrender. We have not totally arrived there as yet. We are definitely heading in the right direction. Sometimes the experience takes us to a totally different meaning. It is fascinating to watch. We also recognize that a large part of ourselves had become objective observers of the situations. Yes, I still do feel distressed at times. They are of lesser intensity and shorter duration. I am moving up the coil. I now look forward to creating daily diversions.
All troubles arise from fear or worry. In surrendering to God, there is nothing to fear because you are protected and guided by the divine. Sri Shakti Amma.